Hey everyone, I'm not sure if this is the right place to share this, but I really need to get this off my chest. I think I'm in serious danger, and I have no idea what to do. So, here's the story. It all started about a month ago. I was browsing some forums late at night, and I stumbled upon a thread about the dark web. I had always been curious about it, but never dared to explore it. That night, my curiosity got the better of me. I found a way to access it, and started browsing through some of the marketplaces. Most of it was the usual illegal stuff you'd expect. But then I found a listing that caught my eye. It was titled, "Mystery Box, Not for the Faint of Heart." The description was vague, but promised a life-changing experience. I knew it was probably a scam, but for some reason, I felt compelled to buy it. Maybe I was bored or just wanted to experience something different. A week later, the box arrived. It was a plain brown cardboard box with no return address. There was a strange, almost metallic smell coming from it. I brought it inside and opened it up, expecting to find some random junk. Instead, I found a smaller box inside, wrapped in what looked like old newspaper. There was also a note that said, "Welcome to your nightmare." I should have stopped right there and thrown the whole thing away, but I was too curious. I unwrapped the smaller box and found a bunch of bizarre and disturbing items inside. There was an old rusty knife with dried blood on the blade, a Polaroid picture of a man with his eyes gouged out, a small vial of what I can only assume was blood, and a DVD labeled, "Watch Me." I was freaked out but still couldn't stop myself. I decided to watch the DVD. Big mistake. It was a shaky handheld recording of what looked like some kind of ritual. There were people in masks chanting in a language I didn't recognize. The camera zoomed in on a person tied to a chair, and I realized with horror that it was the same man from the Polaroid. They tortured him on camera, doing unspeakable things. I won't go into detail, but it was the most horrifying thing I've ever seen. After the video ended, I sat there in shock, trying to process what I had just seen. My phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. It said, "Did you enjoy the show? There's more to come." My heart was pounding as I looked around, feeling like I was being watched. Over the next few days, things got worse. I started receiving more messages. Some were threats, telling me to keep quiet or else. Others were pictures of me, taken from outside my house. Someone was watching me. I called the police, but they couldn't do anything without more evidence. They suggested I change my number and be more vigilant. I started noticing strange things around my house. Objects would be moved, doors that I knew I had locked were suddenly open, and I could hear faint whispers at night. One morning, I found a dead animal on my doorstep with a note that said, "You're next." I barely slept, constantly on edge. I installed security cameras, but they never seemed to capture anything. It was like whoever was doing this knew exactly where the cameras were. One night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps inside my house. I grabbed the rusty knife from the box and slowly crept downstairs. There was no one there, but I found another note on the kitchen counter. It said, "It's only just begun." I felt like I was losing my mind. I didn't know who to trust or what to do. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting someone to jump out and attack me. Then, a few nights ago, I heard someone whispering my name outside my bedroom window. I peeked out and saw a figure standing there, staring at me. I couldn't make out any features, but I knew it was the same person from the messages. I called the police again, but by the time they arrived, the person was gone. The messages have stopped for now, but I still feel like I'm being watched. I don't know how much more of this I can take. I'm scared to leave my house, scared to stay inside. I feel trapped and helpless. If anyone has any advice or has been through something similar, please let me know. I don't know what to do anymore. I just want this nightmare to end. Hey everyone, thanks for the support and suggestions on my last post. I really appreciate it. A lot has happened since then, and I need to share the latest developments. After my last post, I decided to take some of your advice. I changed my phone number and contacted a private security company to install more advanced surveillance equipment around my house. I even stayed at a friend's place for a few nights, hoping that some distance would give me a break from the constant fear. When I returned home, things seemed quiet at first. There were no new messages, no signs of anyone tampering with my stuff. I started to think maybe it was over. I should have known better. A few days later, I received a package at my doorstep. This time, it wasn't in a plain brown box, but in an ornate black box with silver accents. There was no return address, of course. My gut told me not to open it, but my curiosity got the better of me once again. Inside the box, I found a series of items: an old-fashioned key, a small, weathered book, and a photograph of a young woman with her eyes closed, looking almost peaceful, like she was sleeping. The book was a journal filled with handwritten entries. As I read through it, I realized it belonged to a girl named Emily. She wrote about her life, her friends, and her family. But as the entries went on, they became darker. She wrote about being followed, receiving threatening messages, and feeling like she was constantly being watched. It was eerily similar to what I was going through. The last entry was the most disturbing. It simply said, "He won't stop until he has me." I felt a chill run down my spine. Was this some kind of sick game? Was the person who did this to Emily now targeting me? I didn't know what to think. I called the police again, and they took the journal as evidence. They said they would look into it, but I could tell they didn't think it would lead anywhere. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak and groan of the house made me jump. Around 3 a.m., I heard a soft tapping on my bedroom window. My heart raced as I grabbed the knife from the mystery box and slowly approached the window. When I pulled back the curtain, no one was there. But there was something else. A message had been scrawled on the glass in what looked like blood. It said, "Open the door." I froze. My mind was racing. Should I call the police again? Should I open the door? Before I could decide, I heard footsteps coming from downstairs. Someone was inside my house. I crept down the stairs, knife in hand, trying to be as quiet as possible. The living room was dark, but I could see a shadowy figure standing by the front door. I felt a surge of anger and fear. I flipped on the lights and shouted, "Who are you? What do you want?" The figure turned slowly, and I saw him clearly for the first time. He was tall and thin, with a gaunt face and hollow eyes. He didn't say a word, just stared at me with a cold, malevolent smile. I lunged at him with the knife, but he was faster. He grabbed my wrist and twisted it, making me drop the knife. I screamed in pain as he pushed me to the floor. He leaned in close and whispered, "This is just the beginning. You're mine now." Then he was gone. He slipped out the door and vanished into the night. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, there was no trace of him. They took my statement and searched the area, but found nothing. I felt utterly defeated. The next morning, I found another note slipped under my door. It said, "You can't hide from me. I'll always find you." I'm living in constant fear, looking over my shoulder, jumping at every little noise. I don't know who this man is or why he's doing this, but I know he won't stop until he has me, just like Emily. Please, if anyone has any advice or knows anything that can help, let me know. I don't know how much more of this I can take. Hey everyone, I'm back with another update. First off, thank you for all the support and advice. It's comforting to know there are people out there who care. I wish I could say things have gotten better, but the truth is, they've only gotten worse. After the last encounter, I decided to stay with my friend Mike for a while. He's a no-nonsense kind of guy, and I thought having someone else around would make me feel safer. For the first few days, it actually did. Mike installed extra locks on his doors and kept a baseball bat by his bed, just in case. But then, the dreams started. Every night, I'd have the same dream. I'd be in a dark room, tied to a chair, and the man from my house would be standing in front of me. He'd whisper things I couldn't understand, and then he'd start to cut me. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, the pain from the dream still lingering in my body. Mike tried to help, but there was only so much he could do. One night, he woke up to find me standing in his living room, staring at the front door. I had no memory of getting out of bed. He said I kept mumbling something about the key and the door. We both knew it was the key from the mystery box, but we had no idea what door it opened. The breaking point came when we found another note inside Mike's house. This time, it was written in what looked like blood on his bathroom mirror. It said, "He's mine now." That was the last straw for Mike. He didn't sign up for this, and I couldn't blame him for wanting out. I had to leave. I went back to my house, even though the thought of being alone there terrified me. I felt like I was losing my mind. The whispers were getting louder, and I could feel eyes on me all the time. I barely ate or slept. I just sat in my living room, clutching the knife, waiting for something to happen. A few nights ago, I decided to take a closer look at the journal from the box. Maybe there was something I missed. As I flipped through the pages, I found a passage that sent chills down my spine. Emily had written about finding a key, just like I did. She mentioned a door in her basement that she had never noticed before. My basement. I hadn't been down there in years. It was mostly storage, filled with old furniture and boxes of junk. But now, I had to know. I grabbed the key and my flashlight and headed downstairs. The basement was cold and damp, the kind of place that feels wrong even in the daylight. I searched every corner, every wall, looking for anything out of the ordinary. After what felt like hours, I finally found it. A small, almost invisible door behind a stack of old boxes. My hands were shaking as I inserted the key. It fit perfectly. The door creaked open to reveal a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. The smell hit me immediately, that same metallic, rotten stench from the mystery box. I took a deep breath and descended. At the bottom of the stairs, I found a small room. It looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. There were old, rusted chains hanging from the walls, and the floor was stained with something dark. In the center of the room was a table, and on it was another box. This one was smaller, more ornate, with intricate carvings on the lid. I didn't want to open it, but I knew I had to. Inside, I found a set of photographs. They were of me, taken from various angles and places. Some were from inside my house. The last one was the most disturbing. It was a close-up of my face, taken while I was sleeping. On the back of the photo was a note, "Welcome home." I dropped the box and ran upstairs, slamming the door behind me. I could hear whispers, growing louder and more insistent. "You can't escape," they said. "He's coming for you." I don't know what to do anymore. I feel like I'm being driven insane. I've thought about running, leaving everything behind, but I know he'll find me. He always does. Please, if anyone knows how to stop this, help me. I'm desperate. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. Hey everyone, I'm back with another update. Thank you again for all your support and advice. I never thought I'd find myself in this situation, and your words of encouragement mean a lot to me. I wish I could say things have gotten better, but they've only gotten more intense. Here's what happened next. After discovering the room in my basement, I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. The whispers were becoming unbearable, and every night felt like a struggle to stay sane. I decided to take a drastic step. I packed a bag with some essentials and left my house, checking into a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, hoping that maybe, just maybe, I could shake off whoever was stalking me. The first night at the motel was eerily quiet. I almost felt a sense of relief. I managed to get a few hours of sleep, which was more than I'd gotten in days. But that peace didn't last long. The next morning, I found a note slipped under my door. It said, "You can't hide from me." I felt my heart sink. How did he find me so quickly? I decided to keep moving, staying in different motels each night, trying to stay one step ahead. But no matter where I went, he always found me. The notes kept coming, each one more threatening than the last. "I'm closer than you think. You belong to me. It's almost time." Desperation led me to contact a private investigator. I met with him in a small, dingy office downtown. His name was Jack, and he looked like he had seen it all. I told him everything, from the mystery box to the man stalking me. He listened carefully, taking notes, and assured me he would do everything he could to help. Jack started his investigation by looking into the dark web marketplace where I bought the box. He found that the listing had been taken down shortly after I made my purchase. There were no traces of the seller, no digital footprint, nothing. It was like they had vanished into thin air. Meanwhile, Jack advised me to stay with someone I trusted. I couldn't keep hopping from motel to motel. I decided to stay with my parents, who lived in a quiet neighborhood a few hours away. I hadn't told them much about what was happening, only that I needed a place to stay for a while. They were happy to have me, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. That hope was short-lived. The first night at my parents' house, I woke up to find another note on my pillow. "You can't escape your fate." I was shaking with fear and anger. How was he getting in? My parents had a security system, and all the doors and windows were locked. It was like he could walk through walls. The next day, I got a call from Jack. He sounded excited, like he had finally found something. He told me to meet him at a coffee shop downtown. I drove there, feeling a mix of hope and dread. When I arrived, Jack was already there, a file folder on the table in front of him. "I think I found something," he said, sliding the folder over to me. Inside were printouts of old newspaper articles. They were about a series of murders that happened over 20 years ago. Each victim had been stalked and terrorized before being brutally killed. The police had never caught the killer, but there was something else that made my blood run cold. Each victim had received a mystery box before their ordeal began. "This can't be a coincidence," I said, my voice trembling. "It's not," Jack replied. "I think whoever is doing this now was connected to those murders. Maybe a copycat, maybe someone who knew the original killer. I'm still digging." That night, I returned to my parents' house with a heavy heart. I didn't know what to do next. I felt trapped, like a mouse in a maze with no way out. My parents tried to comfort me, but they didn't know the full extent of what I was dealing with. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside my bedroom door. My heart pounded in my chest as I grabbed the knife from my nightstand and crept towards the door. I flung it open, expecting to see the man from my nightmares, but there was no one there, just an empty hallway. I was about to go back to bed when I noticed something strange. The basement door was ajar. I hadn't even realized my parents had a basement. I slowly descended the stairs, flashlight in hand. The basement was cluttered with old furniture and boxes, much like mine. But there, in the far corner, was another small door. My hands were shaking as I approached it. I used the same key from the mystery box, and it fit perfectly. The door creaked open to reveal a small, dimly lit room. And there, on a table in the center, was another box. I didn't want to open it, but I had to know. Inside was a single item, a photograph of me, taken from outside my parents' house. On the back, a message. "It's almost time. I ran back upstairs, heart pounding. I knew then that nowhere was safe. He would always find me, no matter where I went. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I fear the worst. I'm scared, exhausted, and out of options. Please, if anyone has any advice or knows how to stop this, help me." Hey everyone, I'm back with what I hope will be my final update. I appreciate all the support and advice more than you can imagine. I'm not sure how to start this, but here goes. Everything came to a head last night, and I don't know how to feel about what happened. After the incident in my parents' basement, I knew I couldn't keep running. The thought of my family being in danger because of me was too much to bear. I called Jack and told him everything. He agreed to meet me at my parents' house that evening to try to figure out a plan. I spent the day on edge, jumping at every little sound, convinced that the stalker was watching me. Jack arrived around 8 p.m. We sat in the living room, discussing our options. He suggested that we try to lure the stalker into a trap, but I was skeptical. This guy always seemed to be one step ahead of us. How could we outsmart him? As we were talking, the power suddenly went out. The house was plunged into darkness, and I felt a familiar, creeping dread. Jack and I both grabbed flashlights and started checking the house, room by room. When we reached the basement, I knew in my gut that we'd find something down there. Sure enough, the door to the hidden room was wide open. We descended the stairs, flashlights cutting through the gloom. Inside the room, we found another note, pinned to the wall with a rusty knife. It said, "Tonight, it ends." Jack and I exchanged a grim look. We knew we had to be ready for anything. We decided to stay in the basement, hoping to catch the stalker when he inevitably showed up. The wait felt like an eternity. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind outside, made my heart race. Jack tried to keep me calm, but it was clear he was just as tense as I was. Then, around midnight, we heard it. Footsteps coming down the stairs. Slow, deliberate. Jack motioned for me to stay back while he positioned himself near the door. The footsteps grew louder, and then he appeared. The man from my nightmares. Tall, gaunt, with those hollow eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. Jack lunged at him, but the man was fast. He dodged Jack's attack and knocked him to the ground with a brutal force. I screamed and tried to run, but the man grabbed me, his grip like iron. He shoved me into the hidden room and slammed the door shut. I could hear Jack struggling outside, but I couldn't help him. I was trapped. The man turned to me, that cold smile spreading across his face. "It's time," he whispered. He pulled out a knife and advanced towards me. My mind was racing, trying to think of anything that could save me. And then, I remembered the rusty knife we had found earlier. I grabbed it from the table and slashed at him wildly. I managed to cut his arm, and he let out a howl of pain. He grabbed my wrist and twisted it, making me drop the knife. I thought it was over, But then Jack burst through the door, tackling the man to the ground. They struggled fiercely, but Jack managed to pin him down. I grabbed the knife again and held it to the man's throat, my hands shaking. "Who are you?" I demanded. "Why are you doing this?" The man just laughed, a chilling, hollow sound. "You don't understand," he said. "You're part of something bigger. This is only the beginning." Before I could respond, Jack punched him hard enough to knock him out. We called the police and they arrived quickly, taking the man into custody. He had no ID, no records, nothing that could tell us who he really was. The police assured us they would do everything they could to find out more, but I had a sinking feeling we'd never know the full story. In the days that followed, I tried to piece my life back together. The whispers stopped, and the feeling of being watched slowly faded. Jack and I stayed in touch, and he continued his investigation, but there were no new leads. It was like the man had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only questions and nightmares. I'm still dealing with the trauma of what happened, and I know it will take time to heal, but I'm trying to move forward, taking things one day at a time. I've started therapy, and my parents have been incredibly supportive. Life is starting to feel a little more normal, but I'll always be looking over my shoulder, wondering if the nightmare is truly over. Thank you to everyone who followed my story and offered support. It's been a terrifying journey, and I couldn't have made it through without knowing there were people out there who cared. I hope this is the end, but if I've learned anything, it's to always be prepared for the worst. Stay safe, everyone, and if you ever get a mystery box from the dark web, do yourself a favor and burn it. I never thought I'd be one of those people who turn to Reddit to spill their guts about something horrific. But here I am. I guess the anonymity feels safe, even if nothing else does anymore. This is a long story, but I need to get it all out, and I hope you'll stick with me to the end. You need to understand everything to grasp the nightmare I've been living. It all started about a year ago. My friend Martha and I had been best friends since middle school. We shared everything, interests, secrets, even dreams of starting a YouTube channel together. Martha was always the adventurous one, constantly pushing boundaries. I was more of the cautious type, always trying to reel her back when she got too close to the edge. It was a dynamic that worked for us, until it didn't. Martha had been getting into some shady stuff online. She was fascinated by the dark web, the forbidden corners of the internet where anything and everything was possible. I always told her to be careful, but she brushed off my concerns. "It's just for fun, man. I'm not doing anything illegal," she'd say, but I could see the obsession growing in her eyes. One night, we were hanging out at my place and Martha was unusually quiet. She had that look in her eyes again, the one that said she was up to something. After a few beers, she finally told me. She had found a live stream on the dark web. "You won't believe this, dude. It's like nothing we've ever seen before," she said, her voice low and urgent. I was immediately on edge. "Martha, this sounds like a bad idea," I warned her, but she just grinned and said, "Trust me, it's going to be epic." Reluctantly, I agreed to check it out. Martha pulled out her laptop and began the process of accessing the dark web. She had it down to a science Tor browser, VPN, the whole shebang. I watched as she navigated through a maze of links and strange, cryptic websites. Finally, she found what she was looking for, a link to a live stream titled The Show. The screen went black for a moment, and then the stream loaded. At first, it was just static and darkness, but then a figure appeared. It was a man wearing a grotesque mask, like something out of a horror movie. The mask was white with black hollow eyes, and a mouth that seemed to be twisted into a perpetual scream. He stood in front of the camera, silent and motionless. Behind him, I could make out what looked like a dingy basement, dimly lit and filled with various tools and equipment that I couldn't quite identify. "What the hell is this, Martha?" I asked, feeling a chill run down my spine. But Martha was transfixed, staring at the screen with wide eyes. "Just watch," she whispered. The man on the screen finally moved, raising one gloved hand to point directly at the camera. Or at us, it felt like. Then, he stepped aside to reveal something that made my blood run cold. There was a chair in the middle of the room, and tied to it was a person. The camera angle didn't give a clear view of their face, but I could see that they were struggling, trying to free themselves. The masked man began to speak, his voice distorted and inhuman. "Welcome to the show. Tonight's performance is a special one. He walked over to the chair and grabbed the person's hair, yanking their head up to face the camera. I gasped, my heart pounding in my chest. The person in the chair was a young man, probably in his 20s. He looked terrified, his eyes wide with fear, a gag muffling his desperate cries. Martha leaned forward, her face illuminated by the eerie glow of the screen. "This is insane," she muttered, but I could hear the excitement in her voice. I wanted to shut the laptop, to end this madness, but I couldn't move. It was like I was frozen in place, forced to watch this horrifying spectacle unfold. The masked man continued his monologue, describing in gruesome detail what he was going to do to the poor soul tied to the chair. He picked up a knife, and I saw the blade glint in the dim light. My stomach churned, and I looked away, unable to watch what came next. But Martha didn't look away. She was completely absorbed, her eyes glued to the screen as the man began his sickening work. I don't know how long we sat there, but it felt like an eternity. When it was finally over, the screen went black again, and Martha closed the laptop with a shaky hand. We sat in silence for a long time, the horror of what we'd just witnessed hanging in the air between us. "Martha, this is messed up. You can't keep watching this crap," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She just nodded, but I could see the conflict in her eyes. She was addicted to the thrill, to the darkness that lurked in those hidden corners of the internet. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that masked man, heard the muffled screams of his victim. I decided I wouldn't go down that rabbit hole again. But Martha, she couldn't let it go. Over the next few weeks, Martha became more and more withdrawn. She stopped coming around as much, and when we did hang out, she was always on edge, checking her phone constantly. I knew she was still watching those streams, but she wouldn't talk about it. It was like she was slipping away into some dark abyss, and I couldn't reach her. Then, one day, Martha disappeared. At first, I thought she was just laying low, maybe taking a break from everything. But after a few days with no word from her, I started to worry. I called her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I went to her apartment, but there was no answer. I asked around, but no one had seen her. It was like she had vanished off the face of the earth. I reported her missing, but the police didn't seem to take it seriously. They said she was probably just taking some time for herself, that she'd show up eventually. But I knew Martha better than that. Something was wrong, and I was determined to find out what. I started digging through her things, looking for any clue as to where she might have gone. It didn't take long to find her laptop. I hesitated for a moment, then opened it up and began searching. It didn't take long to find the link to the show. My heart sank as I realized what she'd been doing. I knew I had to go back into that dark place to find her, even if it terrified me. Taking a deep breath, I accessed the dark web the way Martha had shown me. I found the link to the show and clicked on it, my hands shaking. The stream loaded, and I felt a sense of dread wash over me. The masked man appeared on the screen, just as before. But this time, there was something different. There was a new chair, a new victim. And when the masked man pulled back the person's head, revealing their face to the camera, I felt my heart stop. It was Martha. I could see the fear in her eyes, the desperate plea for help. I wanted to reach through the screen and save her, but I was powerless. The masked man began his sickening monologue just as before, describing in graphic detail what he was going to do. I knew I had to do something, but I had no idea where Martha was, no way to reach her. Panicking, I called the police, trying to explain the situation. They were skeptical at first, but when I gave them the link and they saw it for themselves, they finally took me seriously. They promised to do everything they could to find Martha and save her, but deep down, I knew it was too late. I sat there, staring at the screen, tears streaming down my face as I watched my best friend suffer. The helplessness, the horror, it was overwhelming. The stream cut off abruptly, leaving me in the dark, both literally and figuratively. That was the last time I saw Martha. The police never found her, and the dark web connection disappeared as mysteriously as it had appeared. I'm left with nothing but the memories and the guilt, wondering if there was something more I could have done. I'm sharing this story now because I can't carry it alone anymore. I need you to know what happened, to understand the darkness that's out there, lurking just beneath the surface. If you're ever tempted to explore those forbidden corners of the internet, remember my story. Remember Martha. and stay far, far away. After Martha's disappearance, my life spiraled into chaos. The police kept telling me they were doing all they could, but it felt like I was the only one who really cared about finding her. Her family was devastated, and the helplessness I felt was crushing. Every day was a blur of anxiety and sleepless nights. I couldn't get the image of her terrified face out of my mind, and the masked man's voice haunted my every thought. I started spending all my time trying to piece together the clues that might lead to her. I scoured every corner of the dark web, digging through forums and chat rooms where people shared rumors and urban legends about the show. It was like chasing ghosts. The deeper I went, the more elusive the truth became. The dark web was a labyrinth of secrets and lies, and I was hopelessly lost in it. One night, as I was sifting through yet another obscure forum, I received a private message from a user with the handle Watcher01. The message was simple. I know what happened to your friend. Meet me on this link. Tomorrow, midnight. There was a URL attached. My heart raced as I stared at the screen. Was this a trap? A cruel joke? Or was it a genuine lead? I had no choice. I had to find out. The next night, I was ready. I had my VPN on, my Tor browser open, and I clicked the link. It led to a private chat room, dimly lit by the eerie glow of the dark web's aesthetic. After a few moments, a new user joined, Watcher01. Are you alone? The message popped up. I typed back, yes. Who are you? There was a pause. Then the reply came. Someone who's seen too much. Someone who wants to help. Your friend is a victim of something much bigger than you can imagine. The show is just the surface. I felt a chill run down my spine. What do you mean? Where is she? The response was slow, deliberate. The show is run by a group. They call themselves the Directors. They kidnap people, force them to participate in their twisted performances, and broadcast it to their sick audience. Your friend was one of their latest stars. I could feel my pulse in my throat. How do I find them? Watcher01 replied with another link. This will take you to a hub. From there, you can trace their connections. But be careful. They are always watching. I clicked the link, my hands trembling. It led to a complex network of forums and hidden sites, all connected in a way that seemed to form a web of depravity and darkness. I spent hours navigating through the information, piecing together the connections. There were snippets of conversations, hints about locations, and mentions of the Directors. Days turned into weeks as I delved deeper, isolating myself from everything and everyone. I was obsessed, driven by the desperate need to find Martha and bring her home. I barely ate, barely slept, consumed by the hunt. Every lead I followed seemed to bring me closer, but also deeper into the twisted world of the show. One night, as I was browsing through yet another hidden forum, I found a post that caught my attention. It was from someone claiming to have survived the show. The details were vague, but it was the first solid lead I'd found. I messaged the user, hoping for a response. Hours later, I got one. Meet me here, tomorrow, 2 a.m., another link. I knew it was risky, but I had no choice. I had to follow every lead, no matter how dangerous. The next night, I clicked the link. It led to a video chat. The screen was dark at first, but then a figure appeared. It was a man, his face partially obscured by shadows. He looked gaunt, haunted. Are you the one looking for the girl? He asked, his voice shaky. Yes. Please, if you know anything, tell me, I pleaded. He sighed, glancing over his shoulder nervously. I managed to escape, but I've been hiding ever since. The Directors, they're everywhere. They have eyes and ears in places you wouldn't believe. I leaned forward, desperate for more. Do you know where they took her? Where they are? He nodded slowly. There's a place. An abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. That's where they hold their auditions. But you have to be careful. It's heavily guarded. And once you're in, there's no guarantee you'll get out. My mind raced. This was it. This was the lead I needed. Thank you. I'll find her. I'll stop them. He shook his head, a sad smile on his face. I hope you do. But be prepared. What you'll see, you can't unsee. The show is just the beginning. They have layers of horror you can't even imagine. The screen went dark, and I was left alone with my thoughts. An abandoned warehouse. It was a start. I knew it would be dangerous, but I couldn't turn back now. Martha was out there, and I was her only hope. I spent the next day preparing. I gathered supplies, made a plan. I even wrote a letter to my family, just in case I didn't make it back. As night fell, I steeled myself for what was to come. I drove to the outskirts of town, the abandoned industrial area, looming like a dark specter on the horizon. The warehouse was exactly where the man had said it would be. It was a massive, decrepit structure, long forgotten by the world. I parked a safe distance away and approached on foot, sticking to the shadows. As I got closer, I could see faint lights inside, and the occasional silhouette moving past broken windows. I found a side entrance, prying open the rusted door as quietly as I could. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay. I moved cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. Every step echoed through the empty halls. Every shadow seemed to hide a lurking threat. I followed the faint light, creeping deeper into the bowels of the warehouse. Eventually, I heard voices, low, murmured conversations. I peeked around a corner and saw a group of people gathered in what looked like a makeshift control room. Screens lined the walls, displaying various camera feeds. They were watching everything. I held my breath, inching closer. I needed to find out where Martha was. One of the men was speaking into a headset, giving orders. Make sure the next one is ready. The directors want this to be a special performance. I felt a surge of anger and fear. I had to find her. I moved past the control room, deeper into the building. The layout was a maze, but I kept going, driven by the thought of saving my friend. Finally, I found a door marked Studio. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was dark, but I could see the outline of a chair in the center, illuminated by a single flickering light. And in that chair, bound and gagged, was Martha. My heart leaped into my throat. I rushed to her side, pulling at the restraints. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and relief. "It's okay. I'm here. We're getting out of here," I whispered, working frantically to free her. But before I could finish, the door slammed shut behind me. I spun around to see the masked man standing there, a cruel smile hidden beneath his twisted mask. "Welcome to the show," he said, his voice dripping with malice. I stood frozen, the masked man's presence like a physical weight pressing down on me. His eyes, cold and calculating, peered through the grotesque mask, and I could feel his sadistic pleasure. Martha whimpered, her eyes pleading with me to do something, anything. "Let her go," I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's over. The police are on their way." The man chuckled, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "Do you really think it's that simple? The show must go on, and you've just become the next performer." Before I could react, the door behind him opened, and two burly men entered, grabbing me from behind. I struggled, but their grip was like iron. They forced me into a chair next to Martha's and began tying me down. The masked man watched, his amusement evident. "This isn't some game," I spat, trying to buy time. "People know we're here. They'll find us." He shook his head slowly. "No one will find you. The directors are very good at what they do. This place, it's a labyrinth. Even if someone knew where to look, they'd never make it in time." I felt the last of my hope slipping away as the men finished securing me. The masked man stepped closer, leaning in until his masked face was inches from mine. "But don't worry, you'll be a star. And stars never truly die. They just fade away." With that, he turned and walked to a table covered in a variety of implements. He picked up a camera and pointed it at us, adjusting the lens. "We're live in 5, he said, his voice carrying a sickeningly professional tone. "Make sure you smile for the audience." I looked at Martha, her eyes brimming with tears. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I should have found you sooner." She shook her head, her gag preventing her from speaking, but the message in her eyes was clear. She didn't blame me. The situation was beyond our control. The masked man began his twisted performance, narrating to the camera about our impending fate. He taunted us, described in graphic detail what he planned to do. The viewers, unseen but surely out there somewhere, were his audience. I could imagine them, sitting in dark rooms, reveling in the horror unfolding before them. Time seemed to stretch and distort. I felt like I was in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The man approached with a scalpel, holding it up to the light. I could see the reflection of my terrified face in the blade. "And now, the moment you've all been waiting for," he intoned, stepping closer. Suddenly there was a loud crash from somewhere in the warehouse. The man paused, looking towards the door. "What the hell?" he muttered. The men who had tied me down exchanged glances, clearly confused. The crash was followed by shouting and the sound of footsteps. My heart leaped. Could it be? Had someone actually found us? The masked man barked orders, and his goons moved towards the noise, leaving us momentarily unattended. I used that brief window of distraction to struggle against my bonds. They were tight, but the adrenaline surging through me gave me strength. I managed to loosen one hand, then the other. Martha watched, her eyes wide with hope. "Hurry," I whispered, freeing myself completely and moving to untie her. The shouting grew louder, closer. I worked as fast as I could, my fingers fumbling with the knots. Finally, she was free. I helped her up, and we moved towards the door, trying to stay as quiet as possible. We slipped out into the hallway, the sounds of a struggle echoing through the building. Whoever had come was putting up a fight, and the distraction was our chance to escape. We crept through the shadows, trying to find a way out. Every corner we turned, every door we opened, felt like it could be our last. Eventually, we found a staircase leading up. We took it, climbing as quickly and quietly as we could. The noise from below was chaotic. Shouts, crashes, the occasional sound of something breaking. It was as if the entire warehouse was alive with the struggle. We reached the top floor and found an exit leading to the roof. The night air was cold, but it felt like freedom. We crossed the roof, looking for a way down. There was a fire escape on the other side, and we hurried towards it. Just as we reached the ladder, a voice rang out behind us. "Stop right there!" We turned to see the masked man, his calm facade gone, replaced by pure rage. He started towards us, but we didn't wait. We scrambled down the fire escape, our movements frantic. The metal creaked and groaned under our weight, but it held. As we reached the ground, I looked up to see the man standing on the roof, watching us with those cold, hollow eyes. "You can run, but you can't hide," he shouted, his voice echoing through the night. We didn't stop. We ran, putting as much distance between us and the warehouse as possible. My heart pounded, not just from exertion, but from the terror of knowing we were still being hunted. We found a payphone and called the police, telling them everything. They promised to send units immediately, but we couldn't just wait. We needed to disappear, to find somewhere safe until this was over. We ended up at a motel, huddled together in a dingy room, waiting for news. The hours ticked by, and eventually there was a knock on the door. I opened it cautiously, relieved to see a police officer standing there. "We found the warehouse," he said, "but it was empty. Whoever was there, they're gone now. We'll keep looking, but for now, you both need to come with us. You're not safe here." I looked back at Martha, who nodded weakly. We followed the officer, knowing that this nightmare was far from over. The directors were still out there, and they wouldn't stop until they found us. As we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that the masked man's promise would come true. The show was just the beginning, and the real horror was only just starting. The police took us to a safe house, a nondescript building in a quiet part of town. It was designed to be as inconspicuous as possible, a place where we could hide while they tried to figure out our next move. They assured us that they had everything under control, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in my gut. Martha and I were given a small room with 2 beds, a bathroom, and a single window that overlooked a deserted alleyway. It wasn't much, but it was a safe haven, at least for the moment. The police posted an officer outside our door and another at the entrance of the building. They promised us that we were secure, but after everything we had been through, it was hard to feel safe anywhere. We spent the first night in the safe house mostly in silence. Martha was still in shock, and I was too wrapped up in my own thoughts to offer much comfort. I kept replaying the events in my head, trying to piece together how everything had gone so wrong. I couldn't believe we had come so close to escaping, only to be pulled back into this nightmare. In the early hours of the morning, just as the first light of dawn was breaking, I finally drifted off to sleep. But my rest was plagued by nightmares. I saw the masked man's face, heard his twisted voice, and felt the cold, unyielding grip of the ropes that had bound me. I woke up in a cold sweat, the echoes of my dreams still reverberating in my mind. Martha was already awake, sitting on the edge of her bed and staring out the window. "Do you think they will find us here?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I don't know," I admitted, "but we have to trust that the police know what they're doing. We can't do this alone." She nodded, but I could see the fear in her eyes. She didn't believe we were safe any more than I did. The directors had resources and reach far beyond what we could comprehend. They had found us before, and there was no reason to think they wouldn't find us again. Later that day, the police brought in a detective who specialized in cybercrimes. Detective Harris was a grizzled veteran with a no-nonsense attitude. He sat us down and asked us to recount everything we knew about the show, the directors, and the events leading up to Martha's abduction. As we told our story, I could see a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "We've been tracking this group for a while," he said. "They're incredibly elusive. Every time we get close, they vanish without a trace. But your information might be the break we need." He showed us a series of grainy photographs and screenshots, each one depicting scenes similar to what we had seen on the dark web. There were masked figures, bound victims, and makeshift studios that could have been in any abandoned building. It was a glimpse into the horror that we had narrowly escaped. "We've identified a few locations that match the descriptions you've given us," Detective Harris continued. "We're planning raids on these sites, but we need to keep you two hidden until we can take them down." Days turned into weeks as we waited in the safe house. The police conducted their raids, but each time they came up empty-handed. The directors were always one step ahead, their operations moving and changing like a sinister game of cat and mouse. The frustration and fear began to wear on us, and I could see Martha growing more and more despondent. One night, as we were eating a meager dinner provided by the police, Martha suddenly spoke up. "We can't just sit here and wait," she said, her voice shaking with determination. "We have to do something." "What can we do?" I asked, feeling a mixture of fear and helplessness. "We don't even know where to start." She looked at me, her eyes blazing with a resolve I hadn't seen in a long time. "We start by fighting back. We know how they operate. We can use that against them." Her words ignited a spark of hope in me. Maybe she was right. Maybe we couldn't rely on the authorities to save us. We had to take matters into our own hands. We spent the next few days planning our move. We knew it was risky, but staying put felt like a slow death sentence. We gathered as much information as we could from the police files, memorizing locations and faces. Then, one night, we made our move. We slipped out of the safe house under the cover of darkness, avoiding the guards and making our way to the nearest bus station. We took the first bus out of town, heading for one of the locations we had identified from the files. It was an old, abandoned factory on the outskirts of the city, a place that had been flagged as a potential site for the show. As we approached the factory, my heart pounded in my chest. This was it. This was our chance to strike back. We crept inside, the darkness swallowing us as we moved through the decaying corridors. We could hear faint voices and the hum of machinery, signs that we were not alone. We found a vantage point overlooking a large room filled with cameras, lights, and a setup that looked eerily familiar. It was another studio, another stage for their twisted performances. And there, in the center of it all, was the masked man, giving instructions to his crew. Martha and I exchanged a look, our fear replaced by a fierce determination. We had to stop this. We had to save whoever was next. We moved closer, staying in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. But just as we were about to make our move, the masked man turned and looked directly at us. "I knew you'd come," he said, his voice carrying a sinister edge. The show must go on, after all. Suddenly we were surrounded. More masked figures emerged from the shadows, their hands gripping us tightly. We had walked right into a trap, and now we were at the mercy of the directors once again. The masked man stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "Welcome back," he said. "You've made this show even more special." As they dragged us towards the center of the room, I felt a sinking dread settle over me. We had tried to fight back, but we had underestimated their reach, their power. Now, we were about to become the next stars of their twisted spectacle. The last thing I saw before they forced me into the chair was Martha's terrified face, mirroring my own despair. The lights blazed to life, and the cameras started rolling. The show was about to begin, and this time, there would be no escape. The lights blinded me as they forced me into the chair, securing my wrists and ankles with tight, unforgiving straps. The masked man moved with an eerie calm, his eyes never leaving mine. Martha was restrained in the chair beside me, her face pale and drawn with fear. "Tonight's performance is truly a special one," the masked man announced, his voice echoing through the cavernous space. "Our two stars thought they could escape, thought they could fight back. But the show always goes on." The audience, hidden behind the cameras, was invisible to us, but I could feel their presence like a cold hand on my spine. This was entertainment for them, a perverse thrill. And we were their main attraction. I struggled against my restraints, but it was useless. The masked man approached with his scalpel, holding it up for the cameras to see. "Let's begin," he said, his voice dripping with anticipation. Before he could start, a loud crash echoed from the entrance of the factory. The masked man paused, his head snapping towards the noise. I could hear shouting, the sounds of a struggle. My heart leaped with a mix of hope and terror. The door burst open, and a team of SWAT officers stormed in, weapons drawn. "Freeze! Get down on the ground!" they shouted. The masked man stepped back, his calm facade cracking for the first time. Chaos erupted as his crew scrambled to escape, but the officers were quick, efficient. They subdued the masked figures one by one, securing the area. The masked man tried to make a run for it, but an officer tackled him to the ground, ripping off his mask. For the first time, I saw his face, a man in his 40s with cold, calculating eyes and a twisted smile. He looked ordinary, which somehow made it all more horrifying. The officers freed Martha and me from our restraints, pulling us to safety. As we were led outside, the reality of our rescue began to sink in. We were safe. The nightmare was over. Detective Harris was waiting for us, a relieved smile on his face. "We got your message," he said. "It was a risk, but we couldn't let you go in alone." I nodded, my body trembling with a mixture of relief and lingering fear. "Thank you," I managed to say, my voice hoarse. Martha clung to me, tears streaming down her face. "We're free," she whispered, as if saying it aloud would make it real. Over the next few days, the police dismantled the operation. They found several locations linked to the show, each one more disturbing than the last. The directors, it seemed, were a vast network, but we had dealt them a significant blow. Many were arrested, including the ringleader, the man behind the mask. The media exploded with the story. The dark web's horrors brought into the light. There was outrage, demands for justice, and for a while it seemed like the world was united in condemning the evils we had uncovered. Martha and I were placed in protective custody, our identities changed to ensure our safety. It was a hard adjustment, but it was a new beginning. The trauma of our experience lingered, but we had each other, and we had hope. Months passed, and slowly life began to resemble something normal. We attended therapy, worked on rebuilding our lives, and tried to put the past behind us. But the scars were deep, and there were nights when the memories would return, as vivid and terrifying as ever. One evening, as we sat together in our new apartment, Martha turned to me. "Do you think it's really over?" she asked, her voice tinged with doubt. I took her hand, squeezing it gently. "The directors might still be out there, but we've done everything we can, and we'll keep fighting if we have to. But for now, we need to live." She nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "Together." "Together," I agreed. We had faced unimaginable horrors, but we had survived. The darkness of the show had tried to consume us, but in the end, we had found our way back to the light. The scars would never fully heal, but they were a testament to our strength, our resilience. As we sat there, the weight of our shared experience settling into something more bearable, I felt a sense of peace. The nightmare was behind us, and the future, uncertain as it was, held the promise of healing and hope. And that, more than anything, was what kept us moving forward. In sharing this story, I hope to shed light on the dangers that lurk in the hidden corners of the internet, the real and present evil that can ensnare the unsuspecting. If you ever find yourself tempted to explore the forbidden, remember Martha's and my story. Remember the horrors we faced, and stay far away from the darkness.